Some of which included introducing art therapy for boys who deal with trauma and loss, target areas to increase boys' participation in STEM and robotics. Additionally, an international travel program to introduce boys to other cultures and to get them outside of DC, and additional sort of support programs that when we saw them, we said, okay, these are all the great things that girls could benefit from as well. There was also the 5 for 500 mentoring through literacy program, so an additional mentorship program that was about $500,000, a Celebrating Males of Color luncheon that brought academic champions and honor roll folks together, and then additionally on top of all of that was the high school. So I think it's very easy to focus in on just the school, but what we're talking about, and I think what was really beautiful about Jeanette's explanation is that what we are talking about is something tangible, like access to a school, but what we are really talking about is systemic sexism that, you know, kind of altogether keeps women out of access to political power, networking power, economic power, that plays out under a really good intention, but it's not well-founded, nor what the ACLU thinks is justifiably legal or constitutional. So what we did is we looked for the justifications, and in DCPS's analysis and in their own sort of data, a few things kind of came to the top. Their own statistics on educational outcomes demonstrated that girls of color, as compared to their female white counterparts, were doing just as bad as male counterparts who were boys of color were to their white counterparts. So the answer here was not necessarily about sex, it was about race. And so they, in that data that we sort of found in the justifications, they also did not appear to have considered whether existing opportunities were sufficient for girls of color. They sort of went in, it's like bad science, right? If you know what you want the outcome to be, you only study the information that will get you to that outcome. And essentially, they did not, the literature survey that DCPS did not point to single sex as a solution. Several papers recommend targeting boys of color, but they did not support excluding girls in programming. They did not research whether single sex was the solution. And in here, if we think about these schools and the programmings, it was interesting listening to Sue talk about, the economics of this. These are programs that are highly intensive. You get a class of boys, you build them a school, you put all this programming around them. If we did that with a lot of students, whether they were male or female, you might get better outcomes. So it's not necessary, correlation does not equal causation. And it doesn't appear that DCPS actually did the research to have an exceeding justification as to why single sex. So what happened? We wrote this report. This was, we felt a great report and kind of pointed to all of these things that the AG has said that he would vigorously defend the school. He sees things in a completely different way. We had multiple conversations. We have yet to see any admissions policy to the school. So we had several conversations. The chancellor would not meet with us. We started talking to DCPS through the AG's office on a phone call with the AG's office. They said DCPS, we asked them several questions. We said, if a girl can a girl apply through the lottery for Ron Brown High School? They said, DCPS has told us yes. Okay. Second question, can a girl be accepted if she applies? DCPS told the AG's office yes. Then we said, if she is accepted, can she attend? And they said DCPS has told us yes. So
Yes.
Yes. So we thought, great. This is great news. I mean, if this is the case, we don't have a case, essentially. And a male-only high school is more of a public relations issue rather than a legal issue here. That they have called it this, that they have said that this is the case. But if girls were to apply to the school, they would be admitted. So we said, great. We wrote a press release, we posted the press release, and said that AG's office has changed their position on the policy. And the AG's office came out and said, well, the ACLU is completely wrong. We never changed our position on the policy. To which we thought, okay, now we're getting into a game of semantics. Maybe you didn't change the policy in the first place. Maybe it's always been that policy. So we have yet to see a policy. I'll skip to my 4 action items. We would love it if people could help us find out what the actual policy is, and that's one of the things that we're pushing for, is to actually see the admissions policy for Ron Brown High School. So when we released this report, we had several community sort of discussions, which I'll talk about in a minute, because I think it also sort of frames how we're thinking about an approach to the North Star Charter School situation, which is what I want to talk about next. So we're sort of in limbo with Ron Brown School for a few reasons. And the admissions policy is one. We don't have a client. No one has complained to us. So we found out earlier I'm forgetting what month we are. It's been a long year since November. Earlier this year, we found out that there was a charter school application proposed in front of the charter school board for North Star Charter School, which is an all-boys charter school that would feed into the Ron Brown High School. It would be located in wards 7 or 8, and which is where Ron Brown is also located. So there was a public hearing on April 24th of this year. There was a charter vote on May 22nd. The ACLU looked through the charter application for North Star Charter and actually submitted comment prior to the close of the public comment period, and we think it had some effect because North Star Charter was approved, but approved conditionally. The conditions, which is the stage that we're at now, are pending sort of a legal analysis and North Star Charter Schools modifications to their existing plan to comply with that legal analysis. So the conditions within that the charter school board gave them was the legal analysis of they call it gender differentiated instruction, but I completely agree, it's sex differentiated instruction. If you look at the application, it says, boys' brains think like this, girls' brains think like this.
Wow.
So with a little it actually said, with a little asterisk underneath that says, for the most part. That's not a direct quote from their application, but
That's the gist.
That's the gist.
Monica, what did you say? I just didn't hear what you said. Girls what? Boys what?
Boys' brains think one way, and girls' brains think another way. So we've seen a lot of this in, I think this pseudoscience of single-sex education or schooling is a really good kind of starting point where we see, boys' brains are very active, they need active things, girls' brains, are much more nurturing and they're
Passive? Are you saying
yeah,
passive?
yeah, it's the very sex kind of
I got news to them.
kind of delineations. So then additionally, some of the conditions on North Star Charter is that they also have to have an English learner plan in place. This is a school that they want to, lift up specifically Black and Latino boys, and they had no English learner plan in place. They did not have strategies for inclusivity around their Latino students. And then finally, there is a component on gender inclusiveness. And I specifically say gender here because the question that we posed not only in the Ron Brown case, but additionally in the North Star Charter School case is, what will the school do with gender nonconforming students or students at some point within the school year or their school career that decide to transition? So it is a real question about gender, in a sex segregated school. And so they also have to produce a plan saying what their response would be to a gender nonconforming student or how they would deal with students in transition.
Is there any precedent that you were looking at with, for example, Mount Holyoke? It seems to me that some of the women's colleges have been challenged with this particular question.
Yeah, I don't, so the question was, did we look at any precedent like Mount Holyoke? I think Smith has also been challenged with how do we deal with gender nonconforming students or students in transition. We didn't look there. Where we did look was what would be their requirements under Title IX in that aspect. But additionally, under the DC Human Rights Act, we have a very robust DC Human Rights Act that includes not only sex, but gender and gender identity, and what are the requirements under that act. We would also have included, Title VII if VII also included gender identity, although there have been conflicting court analyses of whether gender actually fits under sex discrimination. So those are some of the things that we looked at. So where we are right now is trying to figure out first of all, who is providing the legal analysis? So is it the charter school board that is going to provide the legal analysis, and then the charter school then has to respond with a plan, making sure that the charter school board is doing their due diligence and holding charters accountable to the law in their analysis? Or is it the charter school that gets to have the proposed charter school that gets to have their attorneys who can say, well, this is the legal analysis that we've done. Where is that responsibility, and who is going to be in charge of it? And then additionally, we would love to see the modified program plan. So sort of monitoring the follow-up at the charter school board and those meetings, which to our knowledge has not happened yet. So that's another action point of actually watching. And we were very careful because, we didn't want, a lot of times we're balancing civil rights and civil liberties against or amongst each other. And so we had, our kind of adherence to gender equality and sex equality, and additionally racial equality, right? And so we wanted to really say, we don't want to sacrifice one against the other. We were very careful in our report. If we were to do it again, I think, we probably would have gone into the community and had very robust discussions first with the community and actually tried to figure out, absolutely tried to figure out what was going on. Because when we went in, to have actually listening sessions, and to our mind, we were like, okay, it's what lawyers do, right? Let's figure out all the information and gather all the information and the data and FOIA and everything. And we went in, and what we found out was the community wanted this school, but not for the reasons at all that they wanted an all-boys school. They wanted this school because there is a dearth of good education in Wards 7 and 8. They wanted this school because that building the school is being built in was completely vacant. It was becoming a place for bad actors to do bad things in their community, and they wanted it stopped. So it wasn't that they wanted an all-boys school, and I think this is a learning lesson to back up in these things and say, okay, what is it that communities need? And one of the places for action, I think, is really to start analyzing the school system and the inequities and the parity that needs to come wholesale across the education system in the District of Columbia, that has to do with allocation of resources and transportation. We heard from parents, that's really great that no one cares that Metro is hiking fares, and
Don't they get a free Metro card?
They do, but their parents don't.
So that if the parents want to accompany them. Of course, if the parents are immigrants or refugees, right now they're in danger of being caught by ICE if they take their kids to school
And
or
I
pick
think,
them up.
And I think this is the systemic sort of it's hard to divorce these issues to say, okay, let's go in and stop this one thing without really stepping back as advocates for equality in education and saying, okay, we could get equality, but what we really want is equity and justice too. And if we want equity and justice too, we have to say, we have to kind of see these links. And so, one of the things that we are discussing in our office is, how do we look at things like school discipline? Because discipline is done differently at charter schools than it is at DCPS. And what we know from the data that we saw also is that girls are being pushed out. There's a great book called Push Out about girls being pushed out of schools. It's Kimberly Crenshaw and the African American Policy Forum has done great work on it too. And so when when girls are pushed out, then it's hard to see the data about how poorly girls are doing in school if they're not there. So, for us as the ACLU, it's not just about the school, the sex segregated school, it's about the system. And getting parity through the entire system as a tool and a tactic and a strategy to ensure that sex segregated schools don't happen. So,
Just to put a fine point on the problem with regard to lack of equity, the data shows that students in Northeast DC and to a certain extent Southeast are 5 grades below. 5 in terms of various standardized testing when compared with students in Northwest. And the district doesn't like to talk about that. They in fact have kept that kind of information off the school district website. But that is absolutely horrible. That is the worst in the nation, by the way.
That you know of.
No, that is the worst in the nation.
Well-
This information, by the way, was done by a researcher at AFFT, and they know what they're doing, American Federation of Teachers.
Well, she just left.
And they know what they're doing. So I think really the Ron Brown School, and now really did a lot to try to stop that, and I thank ACLU for their leadership and hanging in there on a real tough issue that seemed like it was a politically popular thing at the time. Maybe it is losing a bit of its luster. But certainly girls are the ones who are really being left behind, and I'm anxious to read your report. I did see it come in, I haven't had time. But I think also, if you look at the urban prep academies in Chicago, which is what Ron Brown was supposed to be emulating, although I understand they did change some of their curriculum and some of the other ancillary programs. I think it fairly well demonstrates that these single-sex academies for boys and boys of color don't really work. The college readiness scores for urban prep showed that in the, I think urban prep has 4 or 5 in their chain. Only 3 or 4 of those schools, let me put it this way, 3 or 4 of those schools had college readiness scores of 6% and 13% and maybe 25% college readiness, indicating that these boys, despite their 3 years in these prep academies, were not graduating being totally ready to be accepted in a post-secondary institution. And I think when we hopefully can get some scores for Ron Brown, we can come back and try to do what is needed, and that is to address equity and in a broad fashion, especially for Northeast and Southeast students.
My observation, having sat at the table with people who lead this school district over time, with other state superintendents, the administration of this district comes and goes like the wind.
Yeah.
And that's common in some other cities in the United States, like Detroit too, I noticed, but we have a lot of the same problems there that in DC. I worked for just a couple of years for the school boards here in the national school boards. Is there consistency? Is there purpose? Is there thoughtfulness on the leadership of the board that may have been more consistent or persistent than the administrative leadership? Because you can make appearances before the board in the public comment period and forget the AG, because it sounds to me like the AG is a little off base here.
Well, by the time we got involved, it was a done deal.
Yeah. But this could be an
it-
ongoing way. You can
No,
have, you
yeah.
can monitor the board meetings. They do have a public meeting statute.
Oh, yeah, and so, I mean, I think that that's why we knew about the North Star Charter School. I think that, you know, we try the best, so I should probably, you know, our staff, the ACLU, all the people are like, oh, it's the ACLU, they're huge. You know, we have 10 staff members, which for us is a decent size. So we try to monitor.
But you cover a lot of issues, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
bad behavior going on in
Yeah.
civil rights right now.
Yeah. So, so we try to monitor. We also, and that's why I'm saying, if people are monitoring what's going on, that was the way we found out about North Star Charter School, is someone actually alerted us and said, hey, there was this discussion, at a charter school board meeting, and we dove right in, and so I think there are multiple ways, we're watching, in this space. We also have coalition partners, that, we are part of the Every Student Every Day Coalition, that looks at a variety of student issues, but we also rely really heavily on members of the public, to sort of help us also monitor.
When you have a high-level body like that, there's a state board and a local board, and I think they're probably the same thing, but that's a rather sophisticated entity in the makeup of life. You really need someone who is a professional observer, understands the law and understands the practice and the rules of the group that you're observing. So it might be good to have someone assigned to that permanently.
Are you offering?
Watch what you asked for.
With the school board that's had its authority taken away from it and had it placed in the city council, which is not competent to be running the schools, that is the core of the problem.
I think that is actually what we found.
Thank you for being forthright.
Yeah, I think that is what we found too, is sort of the political willingness. Some of the conversations that we had with the chair of the education committee, kind of outlining our concerns and saying, bringing it up in oversight hearings and bringing it up in budget hearings was, well, the chancellor's going to do what the chancellor's going to do. Now, as someone who has lobbied in other state legislatures.
But you see, there is accountability, and these folks are hired. They have a job description, they have responsibilities, they have day-to-day functions. They answer to someone. You have to get to the body that they answer to and monitor them on a regular basis so that they know you're there. And it brings stuff out in the open.
So I want to hear, and then
I'm sorry, I just have a quick question going back. What was your point on the discipline? You were talking about difference in discipline. I don't know if you were talking about the push out or what? Difference in discipline between charter schools and...
Yeah, so I don't know if folks saw the Washington Post article. It came out probably a couple of months ago about schools keeping lists of students, they're non-admit lists. So students basically, it falls in the category of push out. So basically, students who would misbehave and they would send them home from school, not suspend them, not expel them, but just send them home, and then they would be placed on this list, and the student would come back, and an administrator would tell them, you can't be here, and then just send them home. It obliterates, the parents aren't notified, there's the danger of the student being categorized as truant, the school's still getting, money because technically the student's still enrolled in the school. And so while we know the information based on, the Washington Post report and some FOIAs and things that have happened with some partners that we have, charter schools are much more opaque.
They can be. It depends on the state law. But I will tell you, that's what Betsy DeVos does in her charter schools in Michigan.
I would say
Pushes kids out.
I would say in the District of Columbia, having one of the only federally funded charter school systems in the nation, it's charter school and voucher program. So our charter schools include ones, it's a very convoluted, we are very opaque. And so the discipline, to get back to the discipline issue, looking at policies that have strict definitions of when a student does certain things, here's the criteria that must be met in order for them to be, suspended or expelled. But additionally, what are the notification requirements? What are the students' due process requirements that must be met? And so I think that's one of the ways that we look at kind of parity and equity across all of these kind of intertwined systems that we have.
wanted to also direct attention to what started happening quite a while back as a kind of a seductive term for improving things for girls, and focus on girls. And I think it was the Harlem Girls Leadership School that the Tisch family, got going and had made very feminine this entire style. And apparently made some kind of decent record. But the point, the weasel word there was leadership. And I think that turns up all the time for, tossing something to girls, to a few girls. And I think it's being really questioned whenever it arises, because you can't learn leadership when half of the people that you should be able to lead are not there. So it's an automatic.
Was that public or private?
That school was public.
Well, and she was the chair of the Board of Regents in New York City, and issued heavy-handed leadership that was frankly unfair to a whole lot of people.
I just wanted to make the point that leadership is a joke. And
Or
I
you
became
don't have women
sensitized to it
leading.
because of the same-sex schools issue. As a graduate of single-sex schools, who certainly found joy when my college, which was Vassar, co-education, I was delighted with that, because it's just not realistic to, as we all know, sex education.
And it's very hard to be a leader if you can't read or have access to STEM education.
You have no real-life experience. So you may be great on your campus, but not so on. But you also have to learn to accept that secondary position.
But do you think it is kind of an effort to just do something? I mean, that schools are perceived as being so unsuccessful that someone who comes in with some new idea is going to be embraced just because, just a profound desire to do something different. And then I made a list of the presidents. I think, I don't know if Obama ever went to a single set. Was his high school co-ed? I can't remember, having read his biography.
co-ed
But
high school.
almost all co-ed high school? Oh, then he did. But okay.
But his sister was
Wait,
teaching
okay,
in a
but
single
just
sex.
go back to the presidents. All of them had some affiliation with single sex. I mean,
Right.
going back. I mean, you just see that you kind of wonder if someone's saying, why not do something that the wealthiest people have to pay for? And it's kind of a follow the money thing. If they're going to a great school and I can't go to Landon, why not have a charter school that's as much like Landon? You know what I mean? A single sex school emulates that?
So because the Constitution and Title IX and Title VII require an exceeding justification as to why that education will produce those results.
If
And
it's public money, but what I'm saying is in people's mind.
Oh, yeah.
Why would I not want to go to an institution where I see all these successful people coming because they have money? Why don't I want,
Yeah,
you see what I mean?
but I think that's the bottom line, that a lot of this is about class as
Exactly.
well as
I guess,
gender.
okay, I should
That
have
is
phrased the
the
question
real
better.
issue.
The
about
better question
elitism.
is,
That's what it's
how do you answer the question that people who are poor are denied access to something that people pay a lot of money for, meaning single-sex education? Is that a good
Well,
question?
We know that poverty is the one determinant or class on what school you go to, and how you assimilate into the school. I have worked very hard to get some young women who are poor into cathedral school, and I want to tell you, sociologically, they are not prepared to be with that group, and they drop out before they graduate because the pressure of the class and the poverty and what they can do socially is a deterrent. It isn't the law always, it's that class and finance.
I think we could talk about
Poverty
this
is
all
a
day.
restriction.
We have a
Poverty
question
is
over
a
here.
Oh, quick
restriction.
question. What are the 4 concrete things we can do again?
Oh, yeah, so it was my number 4. I have
Oh.
3 things
Oh.
that actually So, you know, we are working with some coalition partners on the school discipline issue. And so there will be policy that is introduced around school discipline. I think that is an amazing way for people to get involved on the importance of this, especially knowing that girls push out is a real thing and happens, and it's a sex equity issue. Attending and following the charter school and school board meetings. And then additionally, for those of you who want to engage in DC, you know, there are still opportunities to show up at the oversight hearings and the budget hearings that happen between January and April every year, and make your voice be heard and known. There's lots of great information in our Leaving Girls Behind report. It's very lonely to be the lone voice in the wind at those meetings, just
you think?
banging the drums. So we would welcome other people who are really concerned about this issue showing up at those meetings.
You know, I'd be happy to help you out because I do know school law, and I know how meetings should be conducted and how to present issues before meetings. And I'd be happy to assist you if you'd like a volunteer.
And she's a DC resident.
I don't vote here, but I live here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, now it's my pleasure to introduce Jeanette Lim, who briefly introduced herself as we went around the table. Jeanette is our Clearinghouse on Women's Issues Vice President for Legal Affairs, and she is also in charge of this meeting. So she has lots of responsibilities. And Jeanette is an attorney who has over 20 years' experience in civil rights and education, focusing on race, sex, disability, and age discrimination. She's particularly focused on helping disadvantaged and at-risk children improve their lives by obtaining all of their civil rights. And she's held numerous leadership positions in the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, including, this is very relevant, she was the acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights in 2 transition periods, so she knows from the inside what's happening in transition, and we'll have a lot to learn from Jeanette. Although I'm sure each transition is different, and this one is probably the most different of any.
You may want to speak up because you can't hear them.
Okay. She's litigated desegregation cases in K-12 and post-secondary education. And those of you, the younger ones may not have heard of this, but she was the special assistant to the president. She represented the U.S. in obtaining the admission of women to the University of the Citadel in South Carolina. The Citadel, of course, had been an all-male military school. Can you hear me? No?
No.
Sorry, I'm going to stand up. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. Okay. She was Jeanette was the special assistant to the president of Westchester State University of Pennsylvania in 1976 to 1979. I actually got to know Jeanette when I was also working in the U.S. Department of Education, and Jeanette was in charge of program legal, which was the policy program for the whole Office for Civil Rights. In her more recent years in the U.S. Department of Education before she retired, She was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Management and Planning in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. And she's the daughter of Chinese immigrants and has had firsthand family experience with how educational attainment can provide an avenue for improving people's future. She is a Juris Doctor from Temple University Law School, a master's degree, listen to this, you would never guess it, in medical genetics from the University of Wisconsin Medical School, Madison, and a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Jeanette suggested we also let me introduce my friend Emily Martin, who I actually met before she joined the National Women's Law Center. I met Emily when she was working for ACLU. As Emily already mentioned, she's the General Counsel and Vice President for Workplace Justice at the National Women's Law Center, and works on efforts to ensure fair treatment and advocacy, policy and education efforts for women at work, and focuses on achieving workplace standards. She also provides in-house legal counsel and representation to the center. Prior to joining the center, she was Deputy Director of the Women's Rights Project at the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, where she spearheaded litigation, policy, and public education initiatives to advance the rights of women and girls to fair treatment in work, at school, and in housing. She was a law clerk for Senior Judge Wilfred Feinberg of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, and for Judge T.S. Ellis of the Eastern District of Virginia, and previously worked for the center, that's the National Women's Law Center, as a recipient of the Women's Law and Public Policy Fellowship. She has served as the Vice President and President of the Fair Housing Justice Center, a nonprofit in New York City, and she is a graduate of the University of Virginia and Yale Law School. Welcome! And she has 2 children and lives on Capitol Hill.
That's true.
So delighted to have you both. Jeanette, I'm delighted to turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is an important transition period, and the purpose of discussing transition today is to identify our opportunities to save the gains we have made and to protect against the erosion of the rights of women and minorities. If you can't hear me, let me know and I will speak up. I'm going to read from my notes because there's a lot of important detailed information I don't want to overlook. The opportunities that we have today exist in the period before inauguration, right now, and include supporting current agency efforts to stabilize gains. Also, there will be, or has been, burrowing in of political staff, and we need to identify official jobs that are listed in what is called the Plum Book. After the inauguration of the president-elect, there will be opportunities to effect appointments through the whole continuing nomination and confirmation processes. During my 36 years in the federal government, I worked through 9 transitions, 5 of which were elections resulting in changes in leadership, and 4 of which were transitions with the re-election of incumbent presidents. They were all transitions. For 23 of those years, I held senior executive service positions and served as interim assistant secretary in the Office for Civil Rights in the Department of Education. Currently, we are in this period before inauguration, and you will note that some agencies and the administration are likely to promulgate regulations, policies that would want to stabilize existing gains. So these regulations particularly will benefit from our support in making comments and suggestions for adding feminist issues. I personally know how important this period is, and I can share a very personal experience in that regard. After graduating from law school, I started working in the federal government in 1979 in the Health, Education, and Welfare General Counsel. I was assigned to a team of 4 women attorneys to develop an intercollegiate athletics policy to investigate several pending complaints that OCR had. In December of 1979, as HEW, we published in final the Title IX Intercollegiate Athletic Policy. In May of 1980, Education and HHS was formed out of the predecessor HEW. And in November 1980, Ronald Reagan won the presidential election. During 1980, after Ed was created and before Reagan's inauguration, OCR was intent on applying the 1979 athletic policy and issuing letters of findings to establish precedents and stabilize the new policy. We needed to conduct investigations of these long-standing and pending complaints of sex discrimination in athletic programs at universities, including the University of Michigan, the University of Hawaii, Kansas, Syracuse, and Akron, among many others. The investigations of these previously filed complaints were waiting for a policy on the highly controversial college athletics. To apply that policy, we in headquarters, OCR, worked with our regional offices to form investigative teams. And that is how I met my husband, who turned out to have knowledge of the NCAA as a former basketball player. He's 6'5". His and other male investigators' experiences turned out to be invaluable, as we women attorneys had little or no athletic experience. In 1980, there were no NCAA women teams. And the AAIW, Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, supported some programs across the country, but most were run like club sports. I actually kind of liked them. They always had tea after competition. But that's another thing. The investigative teams worked overtime during this period, including over the Christmas holidays, to complete investigations and issue letters of findings, which we did, and the rest is Title IX history. We were able to establish the intercollegiate athletic policy under the leadership of Judge Shirley Huffstetler, who was the first Secretary of Education, appointed for a very short tenure by President Jimmy Carter. Burrowing in. This is a name given to the process of political appointees successfully obtaining a career position before the end of the administration. These conversions must follow the personnel practices of Title V of the United States Code and receive increased oversight and scrutiny by OPM and GAO, especially during transition years. Presently, one can speculate that there were fewer burrowing in conversions due to expectations that a Hillary victory would continue most of the practices of the Obama administration. With regard to confirmations, Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution provides that the President shall nominate and the Senate shall advise and consent in order for certain appointments to be confirmed. Those certain appointments can be identified in the Plum Book, which is published every 4 years during election years. The House and the Senate alternate in compiling the lists of jobs to be filled by department, the type of appointment, the current incumbent, and the salary levels. There are 1,600 presidential appointments, 1,200 of which require Senate confirmation. Of the 1,200 requiring confirmation, there are secretaries of 15 cabinet agencies, deputy secretaries, undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, and general counsels, amounting to over 350 positions. The numbers of Supreme Court, appellate, and district court justices to be filled, which will have extraordinary and lasting effect, are unknown. Director positions in regulatory agencies like the EPA and the Federal Aviation Administration will amount to over 130 positions. U.S. attorneys and U.S. marshals, about 200. Certain positions in independent agencies like NASA and the National Science Foundation will amount to over 120. Ambassadors to foreign nations, over 150. And full and part-time members of commissions and boards, over 160. That's a lot of nominations, a lot of appointments that are important. The appointments, in my experience, during the 1980 to 81 by President Ronald Reagan during the transition from Jimmy Carter are very similar to the current Trump appointments. For the first time in modern political history, President Reagan in 1980 to 81 appointed leaders of agencies hostile to the work of their agencies. For example, I see some nods, James Watt was appointed to head the Interior Department. He announced the goal to open up for use protected natural resources and remove government oversight. Similarly, President-elect Trump has nominated Martin Ebell, a non-believer of climate change, to head the EPA and to lead a major assault on environmental regulations. Currently, the nominations of agency heads, judges, and policy advisors can provide us all an opportunity to communicate to senators reasons to vote to not confirm. Careful vetting of nominees' backgrounds can unearth disqualifying information. President Reagan appointed Terrell Bell to be Secretary of Education after Secretary Hofstadter by Carter, with a goal to eliminate the department. However, teachers, their associations, their unions, and other organizations made known their support for the department through influential individuals and saved the department. By the way, Reagan also appointed Clarence Thomas as his first OCR assistant secretary. I worked under. And Anita Hill was his attorney advisor, but that's a different topic. President-elect Trump has nominated Betsy DeVos, thank you, to be Secretary of Education, who is a choice by school vouchers advocate and anti-public schools. She and her husband have been anti-Title IX through donations such as a $50 million donation to Grove City College, well known for its refusal to accept federal funds in order to avoid complying with Title IX. Nannygate, some of you might remember, refers to the 1993 episodes that derailed two of President Clinton's choices for Attorney General. Nominee corporate lawyer Zoe Baird was found to have employed two illegal aliens as nanny and chauffeur, and her nomination had to be withdrawn. Then federal judge Kimba Wood was nominated, but she too was found to have hired an illegal alien to care for her child, and her nomination was also withdrawn. Finally, President Clinton was successful in appointing Janet Reno to the post of U.S. Attorney General. I had the honor of working for Janet Reno in the Civil Rights Division of Justice. She had been the state Attorney General of Florida, knew the importance of career staff, upon whom she relied and treated with respect. In return, she became one of the most admired, respected, and beloved Attorney General by all of us at Justice. The Robert Bork nomination by President Reagan in 1987 had a lasting impression on the confirmation process. Bork's writings revealed his opposition to the concept of one person, one vote. He wrote against the 1964 Civil Rights Act requirement that hotels, restaurants, and other businesses had to serve people of all races. He was against school desegregation, women's choice, and evolution theory. He did not refute or soften any of these positions, these controversial positions, during confirmation hearings. Minority and women groups made known their strong opposition to his confirmation and their concern that he would roll back the civil rights gains of the Berger and the Warren courts. He failed to receive the needed Senate votes to affirm his nomination, 58 to 48, and a new verb, to bork or to be borked, was born. Defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as, quote, to defame or vilify a person systematically, close quote. The confirmation process was changed forever by this, so that nominees today are so circumspect in their responses during confirmation hearings that one fails to learn what they really think and are left to rely on previous statements in their writings, making it very difficult to discern what they will be doing in the future. Another well-known Reagan appointee was David Stockman to head the OMB, where he applied supply-side and trickle-down budget theories with questionable results. For example, at the end of the Carter administration, the deficit was $79 billion. After 1 year of Stockman's Reaganomics, the deficit was $1 trillion. And after 4.5 years, when Stockman resigned, the deficit was $1.8 trillion. Reagan also appointed Edwin Meese as Attorney General and William Bradford Reynolds as Assistant AG to head the Civil Rights Division. Reynolds was anti-civil rights. I hope this information provides incentive for all of us, for all of you, to learn more about confirmation, to vet and research current nominees for all these important positions, and to use research and information to influence decision makers in Congress. Thank you.